Hello, and welcome to The Advantage Investor, a Raymond James Limited podcast that provides perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. Today is September 12th, 2024. I am Chris Cooksey from the Raymond James Corporate Communications and Marketing Department. And today, Senior Portfolio Manager Neela White returns to the podcast for back-to-back episodes. Neela, I think you might be the first one. Last time we discussed financial tips that can affect women, but also apply generally as well. Today, we are discussing how we can ease the transition of moving mom and dad into retirement or assisted living. I invite you to check out the archives for a lot of great episodes, many featuring Neela. So welcome back to the Advantage Investor, Neela. I hope you are well today.
Thanks for having me back again, Chris, and I am. What could go wrong on a day with the Humidex being in the 30s?
Hey, man, for September, I will take it, Neela.
Exactly.
Now, we are discussing, as I mentioned off the top, how we help mom and dad, but I guess really whomever in our lives to become comfortable with a pretty large life event for many, moving into a retirement home or assisted living space. On a personal level, my two grandmothers went through this. I wasn't involved in the decision at the time, but I remember visiting, and my parents aren't there yet. But I am looking forward to learning more from you on this subject today, Neela, as it is something that affects more and more of us, it seems, as we move forward. And of course, we have spoken about this during COVID and sort of some of the issues that COVID brought to light. But I'm sure for many, this is sort of, if not the last, one of the last big life changes that can occur. Is that an accurate statement?
You know what? I think it's definitely one of those life events that impacts everyone, not just mom and dad, but the adult children as well. It affects, their social connections. And I think it's one of those things that we have to realize that, life events is not a straight line, right? There's all sorts of dips and doodles, and really it's just being aware of them and planning for them and talking about them. And I think that's the biggest thing is, we tend to shy away from these conversations, which does not help decision making, right? Because, what do we shy away from? Things we fear.
Yep.
So how can decision making be made when you already have fearful thoughts, right?
Right. And this is one of those decisions I would guess, like, it doesn't make sense to me that you would wait to the last minute to try to figure things out. You want to plan this out.
Yeah.
Talking about it is important. You may have something in your mind that the person is not going to want to do this. They love their garden or they love their dog and they don't want to do any of this stuff. But then you talk to them, they're like, man, I don't want to cut the lawn anymore. So I'm all in on this. So I guess that's why it can be both a very positive, easier conversation, probably never easy, but easier conversation, or as we talked about, quite difficult.
Yeah, I think it depends on who feels in control, right? So I unfortunately, and I was a caregiver. I was a caregiver for a decade of my life. And unfortunately, as a caregiver, sometimes you're just looking to solve everything as quickly as possible. And that sometimes does not include the care recipient's ability to be part of the decision making and feel as if they're part of what's happening to them. So I think the first thing is we always have to involve them in the decision making. And it helps just because, it lets your parents feel in control. It lets them feel respected. And it reduces those feelings of being forced and abandoned, right? Because they are going to be separated from everything they know. They are going to be in a new environment. And the easiest way to do it is sitting down. And they're not easy conversations, as you mentioned, but having open, honest conversations about why assisted living might be beneficial. And the next step of that is it's so important to tour these places. Unfortunately, assisted living, especially if it comes to long-term care, which is different than retirement home or some forms of supportive assisted living, it has a negative stigma. And I think it's really important to go with mom and dad, aunt and uncle, or whoever, to go on a tour so they can become familiar with their new environment as opposed to drop them off and leave. Imagine, your child, the first day of kindergarten. Imagine that feeling of the child when, after being with mom and dad so long, they're dropped off and they see the backs of mom and dad. It's the same sort of abandonment feeling. And the way we all know to ease children into that is gradual, right? So take them to the facility a couple times, have dinner there, have lunch there, participate in a couple of the activities, go to places where you can recount, hey, mom, dad, you enjoy reading by a window. Go look at the facility or the floor and say, hey, look, here's a window, here's a nice chair. You can still read by the window.
Mm.
That sort of stuff.
So I think first step would be planning or
Yes.
pre-planning, and so obviously visiting would be part of that
Hmm.
discussion. But is there an order that you would suggest you go through this when you're thinking about pre-planning
Yeah.
when you do it? So maybe we can go over that.
I think logically, the first thing is to have that conversation to recognize why there is a need for support. So, it could be they're not eating properly, they're unable to safely um, bathe themselves, safely go up and down stairs, inability to cook, that sort of stuff. I think once you can point out that, not in a condescending way, but to be able to promote how much longer they can maintain their independence through supportive living. So it's not as if in supportive living or assisted living, they're going to do everything for you. It just provides an environment where you have the support, where you can continue to be as independent as possible, and the little gaps are filled in. So I think the first thing is involve them in the decision making, have a conversation about what is it you want, what can we afford, right? Remember, some of this is budget dependent.
Hmm.
And come to a plan A, plan B, plan C. Plan A, let's say that involves retirement homes or assisted living. Go take a look in the neighborhood, whether it's around your parents or around who going to be the potential caregiver or the person visiting often. Make sure it's accessible, make sure the place is nice. Make sure that family can come and visit. Make sure that your social connections are aware that you're thinking about making this transition, right? Because the biggest thing also that helps with the settling in at any location is to have, your friends, your community, the social groups know where you are so you're not like they've disappeared off the face of the earth, and to be able to continue with those social connections, right?
Right, that totally makes sense. I know with one of my grandmothers, she actually moved from Kingston, where my
Mhm.
mom grew up. But my mom and her sisters had all moved from Kingston. Fortunately, they were all in Ottawa, so that transition was easier. But they were very concerned about plucking my
Mhm.
grandmother out of her comfort zone and moving her to a new town because friends and
Yeah.
all the social side of it
Yeah.
for sure. So lots of considerations, I guess, is really what I'm
Hmm.
hinting at here.
Hmm.
Now, in
And
terms of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and one of the biggest things for anyone, whether there's no place like home and you want to age in place, or you're going to retirement living or anything, you want to do as much as you can to prevent the feelings of loneliness and isolation.
Mm,
I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, the World Health Organization declared loneliness as a epidemic.
mm.
Like think of that. Just the lack of social connection. So this is definitely a point in your life where you want to maintain as many of those as much as possible. Unfortunately, we do have technology where, okay, maybe it's a little hard for an elderly friend to visit an elderly friend, but there's still video chats, there's still the phone. The phone still works, right?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Letters still work, postcards still work. So all of these things are still validation of you exist and you're cared for and you're remembered.
And there's relationships that you can
Hmm.
count on. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
totally makes sense. Now, I would imagine the transition into assisted living is a little different. Sure, there are rules,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I'm sure if you come from a condo, the rules are fairly same. You can't put this on your door and all that fun stuff. But you have your dinner times, and you might have a little kitchenette or not or whatnot. But it would be different. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't think anyone can argue that. So, how do you transition into assisted living? What were some of those tips?
Hmm. I'd say there's sort of a bit of two steps. Gradual, if the facility permits it, gradual transitioning usually tends to be the best, right? So it's not this cut and dry environment where I woke up this morning in my own house in my own bed, and tonight I'm going to sleep in a strange place in a strange bed. So a lot of facilities offer respite stays, vacation stays where, you can go and stay for the weekend, you can stay for a week. And I think that's a good way to make the environment less intimidating and get used to the sort of new routine of meals and the social activities and stuff like that. So I think transition helps with the emotional impact of changing an environment. And again, if possible, start with short stays, start with visits, start with respite, so you get used to it. And then I think the second part is once you actually make that move. So I guess the first part is, once you decide you're making that move, obviously, a room is going to fit much less than an apartment, a condo, a house, right? So I think you'd want to write down a list of 10 items that are very personal to you that would help, create a sense of continuity and comfort.
Right.
And, it could be, your favorite chair, your favorite ornaments, blankets, pictures. Pictures are so important, right? It allows reminiscing, especially, if your condition tends to be one where there's a bit of decline or memory decline and stuff like that. Pictures are a great way for caregivers and support staff to engage with
Mm,
that person through reminiscing.
right. That makes sense. Now, you started talking about, the list of 10 things, as you said, but most
Mhm,
people are probably transitioning to a smaller space.
mhm.
Um, I know that if you looked at my garage, you would
Huh,
see a bunch of stuff that 1-800
got
junk or
junked.
whatever that place is would need to come in. So, how do you help them with this new space? And, beyond the pictures, how do you make it feel like home?
You know what? I would say if you're able to orient stuff in the room similar to what their bedroom was. So that's one thing. Whatever is closest to where they are in the bed, you'd want to recreate a space very similar like that. Um, Pictures, as I said, is a huge one. Comfort items also tend to be things like comforters, blankets. They tend to carry the feeling of home and security. I'd say that one. Favorite slippers, favorite shoes, favorite nightgown or night dress. All of those things, favorite mug,
Hmm.
all of those things. And think about it this way. When we move to a smaller space and not retirement home or assisted living, don't we usually realize, oh my gosh, how did we accumulate all this stuff because we only use 10% of it?
Yeah.
It's sort of the same, it's sort of a bit of a similar experience, right? What are the 10 things that if you think about when you eat breakfast that you use, when you shower that you use, when you dress that you use, when you watch TV or read, what do you use? And I would go through with that. What is the most important thing within each habit that you have?
Hmm. Now, just to finish off here, then,
Mhm.
obviously this is a big conversation and decision to make. What are your suggestions on timing to have this conversation? Is it really, you plant the seed early so you can have like more of a, I don't know if you could call it casual conversation about this sort
Mhm.
of thing, but like, is that best? The longer, the better. The lead up
Yes.
time. Do you get
Yes.
comfortable?
You know what? I can't stress this enough how important it is to start these conversations early while the conversations are still positive. I think part of the problem, and I understand this, that we tend to be very reactive in a moment of crisis.
Hmm.
So a diagnosis comes, a fall comes, a hospitalization comes, then all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, we don't know where to turn. And you tend to make decisions that satisfy the moment or alleviate the pressure point at that time. Whereas if you start this conversation early, you can actually look at the positives because they're part of the decision making, not you as caregiver or power of attorney are forcing the decision upon them because they are medically more complex. The support they need is more complex. So I think
Right.
early's better, focus on the positives of that move. Set up a communication plan and discuss it with stories you've heard of other people going through similar things. I mean, the biggest thing is when we can share stories about the good and the bad and the ugly. That way we
Mhm.
can address the bad and the ugly early on and then focus on the good.
Right. Totally
Hmm.
makes sense. Now, is
Hmm.
there anything else you'd like to leave us with today?
You know what? I would have to say, I'll be the first to say that change is difficult, transitioning is difficult. I think we need to focus on the pauses. We need to stay involved, especially if we're part of the plan. We need to stay involved because this will affect us.
Right.
And I think when the move and the decision is made, we need to celebrate that. celebrated as this autonomous, independent decision that mom and dad made for themselves. And it alleviates that whole feeling of guilt of, maybe I could have tried harder. Maybe if we had done this, maybe if we had done that.
Right.
So I think
Makes
those
sense.
are all positives. And yes, start early. It doesn't matter that the conversation isn't one that's necessary at the time, but conversations do stay in people's minds. And at some point, it might be, you know, I can't manage the stairs very well in the morning, or I noticed I left the stove on.
Mm,
What could be happening? Do I possibly need a bit of support? Who can, provide that support? Let's go back to that conversation that we had. Oh, my budget supports a retirement home. Okay, maybe that's something we look at now.
that makes sense. Well,
Mhm.
Neela, as I've said before, I always learn something. You always give me something to take away and to think about. So really appreciate your time, and I hope we do it again soon.
Great. Thank you for having me and have a great day.
Reach out to us at advantagedinvestorpod@raymondjames.ca. Subscribe through Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please contact your advisor with any questions you have. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. Until next time, stay well. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Statistics and factual data and other information are from sources Raymond James Limited believes to be reliable, but their accuracy cannot be guaranteed. Information is furnished on the basis and understanding that Raymond James Limited is to be under no liability whatsoever in respect thereof. It is provided as a general source of information and should not be construed as an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any product and should not be considered tax advice. Raymond James advisors are not tax advisors, and we recommend that clients seek independent advice from a professional advisor on tax-related matters. Securities-related products and services are offered through Raymond James Limited, member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Insurance products and services are offered through Raymond James Financial Planning Limited, which is not a member of Canadian Investor Protection Fund.